Greetings and welcome to week 3 of Introduction to Grants. Again, this is Jay Katz, and this week's topic is finding funding. Today, we're going to discuss a variety of topics, including how personal connections are so important and their role in finding funding and cultivating funder relationships. We're also going to talk about researching foundation grant opportunities and researching government opportunities, whether they be at the local, state, or federal level. We're also going to outline some of the key tools for researching funding opportunities. And I'm going to give you some time to practice what we've learned today to really understand it from your own perspective. So on we go. Why do foundations make grants? Now, we spoke to this a little bit last week, and we spoke to it from a variety of perspectives when we were talking about they like the organization, they like the organization's proposal, that they have a really good proposal aligned with their interests, or they generally just think the organization's a good organization. So I want to talk to why the foundation knowing a little bit about the organization, not just on paper, but in person is really important. And I'm doing this to introduce this ahead of a lot of what we're about to cover because I want you to have this context as you're researching funding opportunities and thinking about what goes into a grant being awarded. So why are these personal connections important? Funder support groups, they believe in not just great ideas. Now, what I mean by that is I could come up with a great proposal for a fictitious organization that doesn't exist, and I could make them look fabulous on paper, and there would be nothing behind the organization. And sometimes that's actually what funders are looking at, not fictitious organizations, but organizations that don't have a lot of experience or knowledge in what they're doing. And so they're trying to discern, is this an organization that really, really is qualified to be doing what they're proposing? Or is this someone who just came up with a great idea? So we're trying to do that, and we're trying to build those personal connections to introduce the concept and just to build some confidence that the organization applying for a grant is a really great organization, that the culture they have and that the effort they put in and that the knowledge and experience they have is really first rate. And those personal connections that you might have when you're working for a nonprofit organization often are really important to the research process because sometimes organizations have resources to bridge the gap and introduce themselves before they submit a proposal. And I think I'm going to speak to this a little bit right now, and this probably will be more in the second course of the certificate program, but that you're always going to want to try to introduce yourself to the funder before you submit a proposal. What I'm speaking to here is if there's a board member or a volunteer or a staff member that knows somebody at a foundation or that works at a corporation, that often can be an entree to identifying a really good funding prospect. And especially in the corporate world, they look to having employees involved with the organization applying for a grant. That is a very, very big thing. So I wanted to introduce this before we got too far ahead with our talking about the nuts and bolts of grants research. And you'll see the quote here. It's from a former nonprofit fundraiser who ended up at a foundation. And he was talking about how intimidated he was when he was raising funds and afraid to make phone calls and to try to make these build personal connections and build these relationships. And now he understands it's a very interpersonal world where people are wanting to make those personal connections. And I want to talk about some other ways to make personal connections if you don't have them, if you don't have that board member or staff member or other person involved, that there are ways to start the process. And of course, applying for a grant is going to start the process, but here are some other ways to do this. There are a lot of nonprofit events in San Diego. There's National Philanthropy Day annually. There are also various conferences and events around nonprofit issues. I see a lot sometimes at SDSU or University of San Diego has some opportunities. And then there is also an organization called San Diego Grant Makers, which will sometimes host funder roundtables or events where funders and nonprofits will interact a little bit. So there are opportunities to make that personal connection and to be able to build on that. Some other things I talked about: volunteer and staff connections with the funder, and sometimes it's your board members. But the other key thing to think about is organizations that are really out there providing leadership on an issue and helping change how a service is delivered or innovating in some way. The word gets around, and sometimes you will see a lot of these foundations that are actually involved on collaborative boards working on issues. There may be, say, a task force on homelessness in San Diego, and a lot of organizations are involved. And sometimes you'll see a foundation that's interested in that issue being involved on that. So wanted to introduce that to you and to give you that context. You'll see the last bullet point I have on here. This is the actual proposal. I think not that foundation staff are very interested in organizations that have a good presentation and that show that they're very effective in their actual proposal. And I'm not going to cover that in this course. We're going to talk about this in the next course, but I wanted to again give you this big picture thinking when you're thinking about foundations, because what happens in my experience is organizations are very excited when they run a query in a database and they come up with a great list of foundations and they say, here is a list of 50 foundations we found and we want to apply to all of them. And they may not have the context of, well, sometimes you need a personal connection, or a personal connection is going to be very important to a lot of these funders. And we're going to talk about going deeper with our grants research. And this is certainly a key thing to be thinking about, but we're not going to be talking about that this week. We're going to talk about it next week. So I'm going to lead off with funder research, and I'm going to give you a few seconds to think about what are the best ways for identifying potential funders. What do you, if you've had any personal experience with this, tell us what, in a few words, write down a few words about what you have encountered. And if you've never done this before, just make some guesses. What do you think? How would you find funding resources? And as always, I'll give you about 30 seconds, and you're welcome to add this to your student blog. And that would be, or even on the discussion board if you think of something that I don't cover. So on we go, and I'll be back in a few seconds. All right. Well, I'm going to see, you just came up with some ideas and see how you matched up with what I'm going to present. I want to tell you a little bit about what I use. I use foundation databases quite frequently. And these databases really have the best information. They'll profile the funder. They'll tell you how much they're awarding. They'll tell you where they're awarding grants, tell you their interest areas. Very valuable. And a lot of these tools are updated regularly, so they're very good resources. You'll also find some compilations of funding resources, sometimes listservs or organization-specific newsletters around a specific issue, such as I know there's a group called the After School Alliance that sends out resources on here are some funders interested in after-school programs. So it can range across the board. And sometimes it's just a basic internet research. A lot of times I'll start off with a query. I'll find an issue I haven't really raised funds on. Oh, well, we are an animal spay neuter organization. Who's making spay and neuter grants? Well, I may just look spay neuter grants in the Google search engine and see what comes up. Again, the foundation database, though, is going to save you time. Doesn't always catch everything, so you're going to want to look for multiple tools to use, but that's one of the best resources. Want to show you one tool that I use a lot called the Foundation Directory Online. It's available for free at a couple of different places in San Diego County. One's the San Diego Foundation Nonprofit Resource Center. Another is Nonprofit Management Solutions. I'd say this has the best reputation of any grants database, and you can get the access for free at those places, or you can order a monthly subscription. You don't have to have it on for 12 months, but you can order a fairly affordable subscription to do the research that you need. And you can look on here and you can see there are a lot of different resources here. You got the grant maker name, the location, the state, where they're located, what they're interested in, what kind of funding they're going to get, what their geographic focus is, trustees, officers, and donors, which is important, and we'll discuss that. Total giving, which is something I'm always looking at. How much money do they have? Exclude grant makers not accepting applications. That's always very important to do because most funders that do that really aren't open to funding anyone submitting a grant application. Now, there are some other directories out there. There's one called Foundation Search, foundationsearch.com. There's another called GrantStation, grantstation.com. And there are even more than that. So I wanted to give you just a few options to look at. Other ways to search, and I referenced this briefly, you'll find a lot of association newsletters and websites, early childhood, homelessness, workforce development, maybe very specific kinds of websites or newsletters that you can subscribe to that give you grant alerts. Annual reports from similar nonprofits. This is a trick I do. All right, I am working for an organization that wants to run some after-school programs. So I am going to look at who is funding the Boys and Girls Club of San Diego County. That's going to give me some ideas. It's not necessarily going to be perfect because like I said, a lot of these grants are made because the organization has a personal connection with the funder and they know and trust that organization, or it's a board member knows someone at that foundation, and they're not necessarily going to be open for everybody applying, but it's a great starting point. And I might look at a couple of after school programs like Boys and Girls Club and maybe Big Brothers, Big Sisters, that kind of thing to see where they're getting their funding. If I keep seeing the same funders, that gives me a great idea that maybe that funder is really interested in my after school program. Some basic principles of foundation research. You're going to want to use these databases to search by the issue that you're focused on. So you're going to want to consider a little bit about what are the keywords. And I'm trying to do one-word keywords that describes my issue. I might, instead of saying after school program, do mentoring or recreation or youth, and try to keep it as a simple search. But I may try youth development or some other buzzwords that some funders might use. Search by type of support, which is, are they giving support for operating, program support, capital support? Some foundations only award grants for capital campaigns. So keep that in mind as you're looking. And a capital campaign is trying to build a big building or trying to renovate a facility, trying to do something like that with major dollars. And grants are a small piece of that. So if anybody ever asks you, is there a grant to buy a building? Usually the answer is going to be no, because funders are looking for you to raise a lot of other money from a lot of different sources before they're going to consider awarding a grant for that type of project. Geography. Now, geography is very important because a lot of funders are local with their giving. So they want to give in San Diego County. And you will see a lot of these will even specify we fund North County, or we fund Encinitas, or we're funding the state of California. Very, very important. It's not really possible to ask a funder if they're interested in Arkansas to say, well, I have this great program in San Diego that matches up with what you're interested in. Now, you will see some of these national funders that are interested in funding around the country, and they're not really particularly looking at geography. They're just looking for a great innovative program. So it may not always be the most important thing, but I'm always looking for that. I'm always trying to find out what are the restrictions. Asset size. Now, this is really important because here's what happens to me with some of the organizations I work for. They go, Jay, I found this great funder. They are so aligned with what they do. They've got this after school program focus area and they really want to fund group programs like ours. And they go, oh, well, great. And then I come back to them and go, I looked at that and their total asset size is 100,000 and they made $5,000 in grants last year. And my client will normally go, oh, disappointed, but we know better than to try to get a $500 grant and compete with 100 other groups trying to get the $500 grant. We're looking for larger amounts of money. My rule of thumb is trying to find somebody who's making $500,000 in grants a year or more. But I will go lower than that. And I covered in the foundation directory online, you saw that filtering by unsolicited proposals accepted. We definitely want to make sure that they are accepting applications. What a lot of funders do is they say, we don't want to bother with people sending us grant applications. We're going to pick the 10 groups that we want to fund on our own. And it's very hard to convince them unless they already know you and they really like you. It's really hard to convince them to accept a proposal from you or to make a grant to you if you're not already on their radar. Now, you're looking through this database for foundations specifically. You're not looking for foundations that have what's called requests for proposals or abbreviated as RFPs, which some of the national funders do. These databases have that limitation. They're not going to tell you what's current with some of the foundations. Now, most of the foundations you're going to see don't issue requests for proposals. They just say, here are our general grant guidelines. This is what we accept grants for. But some of your national foundations and a lot of your national foundations will ask for a request for proposal. They'll send you that or they'll post it on their website saying, we're accepting applications for children's mental health for kids 0 to 5, and here are the parameters, and write your proposals. But we're not going to find that in these databases. We're going to have to go deeper in our research, and we're going to cover that next week. So this is the end of the foundation portion of the grants research. The second half of the PowerPoint lecture is going to focus on federal, state, and local funding. And while you're loading it up, just give some thought to what makes federal, local, and state funding a little bit different as far as researching that. How do you think there would be a different approach to carrying out that research?